From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. It's Hump Day. It's Patch Tuesday Recovery Day, or in your case, Patch Tuesday Discovery Day, day after. Joining me on the show today, the magnificent, the one, the only, the CTO of Attivo Networks, Tony Cole. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, James, and thanks everybody for joining us today.
I'm so excited for today's show. We've got a lot of things to talk about. Predominantly, we'll talk a little bit about Patch Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit about the SolarWinds 0-day being exploited by a Chinese group, and we'll also look at REvil and their website going dark. Tony's got a few theories on this one, so you guys are going to want to stay tuned to hear those as well. We're going to get to your comments in just a minute, but for everyone, we are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. If you're tuning in, good morning. Thank you so much for being with us. Please make sure to subscribe. Follow us right here on our CyberHub podcast YouTube channel or on our Twitch, also on LinkedIn, also on Facebook. Make sure to subscribe or go to your favorite podcast listening platform where you can catch all of our shows there as well. CyberHub Podcast and CISO Talk Podcast. Also, Friday, in the link below on everything, Carolyn and Joseph from Attivo, Tony's colleagues, will be joining me for an awesome webinar talking about how we close the gap between endpoints and identity protection. So you guys definitely want to be part of that conversation. It's going to be awesome. 11 a.m. Eastern, Friday. Links below. Register to get exclusive access to it. And before we get to our coffee, good morning to Ola joining us, or good afternoon to you, good sir. Another week, another set of issues. They never seem to end, right, Tony?
They don't end. In fact, it looks like it's just a crazy Tuesday yesterday. We already had a crazy busy year so far, and it's only July. And yesterday just really amped it up a little bit more.
Indeed, it did. Indeed, it did. Good morning from Bob Henderson. James McQuiggan, good morning. Hello, Tony. Good to see you again.
Good morning.
And this is John Dela Cruz. Good morning, good sir. And wheels down and I hear late. That's from the awesome Matt Lee. Thank you for joining us this morning. Let's get right into our first story today. But before we do that, my ceremonial espresso, by which I cannot do this show and go over the stories without the power of the espresso and the packed coffee and the beans going into my bloodstream, and thus I'm able to perform super effectively at 0900 hours on a Wednesday morning. So cheers, Tony. I know you may or may not have coffee, but by all means, sir, cheers.
Cheers. I finished my coffee already.
I
needed to talk halfway intelligently.
Now let me move to my Ben Shapiro version. Everyone, here we go. Let's go right. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. We're not going to do my Ben Shapiro impression today, but we'll get started with Microsoft saying on Tuesday that the recently patched SolarWinds Serv-U 0-day that we reported on yesterday is being exploited by a Chinese threat group. SolarWinds can't seem to catch a break this year, but like we all know, once one 0-day comes up, Tony, a bunch of others come through, and typically it's the same threat actor. Right? Because they're the ones with access to this.
Yeah, I thought we were going to spend 2021 completely focused on the Russian threat. So here come the Chinese again, not to be outdone. So with a really interesting one, and poor SolarWinds getting hammered again. And just a reminder to everybody that it can happen to any company. These are some sophisticated actors, typically that are doing some of these attacks. So and creating the exploits for these vulnerabilities.
Yeah, this exploit specifically, though, tracked the CVE 2021-35211, affects the Serv-U version 15.2.3 HF1 and earlier. It's essentially a 0-day for the Serv-U, which is a managed file transfer and secure FTP. So again, now they're going after information sharing, documents. This is also part of a corporate espionage greater picture kind of move that the Chinese typically focus on. According to Microsoft, the vulnerability has been exploited by a threat actor who tracks as Dev0322, and Dev stands for development group and is assigned by the tech giant to groups for which it is highly confident about their origins or identity.
To me, this one's really interesting, and James plays right into, the Chinese national strategy, to go after those items in their 10-year plan that lays out specifically what they need to steal to be more competitive in the global market. It's a little frustrating that politically we've not been able to put the brakes on this action from Russia or China, and definitely not from North Korea.
Well, there's a very interesting thing that we talked about last week, which was, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago, where the NATO commander came out and said any cyber attack on any one of the NATO members could get a military reaction to it. And I found that to be a very immature statement. Because one, you don't say that, right? Our response to something like that shouldn't be something that you say to a newspaper, right? But it should be all right, you guys want to continue to do cyber attacks? We're going to put out more missiles in, Finland and in Norway and in Sweden. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to put more Navy ships there. And when Russia starts beefing about why are we doing that? Well, you guys are doing cyber attacks. We're going to, show strength silently and let the backdoor diplomacy do its work. And it seems like, NATO's that to me is a sign of weakness, right? It's like the guy who says, I'm going to sue you is the guy that never sues you.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's very difficult, I think, to paint a solid red line that if you cross this, we're going to respond with a kinetic action, because quite frankly, unanticipated impact from many of these breaches, just simply isn't known until it happens. When you look at all of the different nation state activity or the criminal activities sponsored by nation states or feeding nation states, you can't really paint a red line. It's got to be, a very gray line that potentially could move one way or another based on what the government decides behind closed doors. And they may explain it later, but I don't think any government is going to paint a solid red line saying, if you cross this, we're going to respond with kinetic action or cyber action. I think it's going to remain relatively gray, and hopefully with a pool of experts looking at it, providing advice on how a government should react.
Yeah, I mean, the response to a cyber attack is while I agree with what the commander at NATO said in aspect of this is the fifth frontier before we move to space, it's cyber. Right before we start, having our spaceships and, Richard Branson and Elon Musk's spaceships fight the Chinese and Russian spaceships in Red Earth with lasers, kind of Star Wars style, because we're on the verge of that. But before we get there, cyber is another battlefield. And cyber doesn't have the rules yet. There's been a bunch of conventions and a bunch of different documents that have been put together. But none of them have really been enforced by the international community or signed by the major players. So all the small little countries will sign on to these cyber rules, but the Russian, the Chinese, and we, the Americans, don't. And those are your three biggest actors. Good morning to David, who's joining us. Thank you for being here, folks. Your comments below, we'll get to those as well as we go through the show. But yeah, this right here is another example, folks, of one, 0 days are part of a software life cycle. It's part of a development cycle. You're going to have 0 days. I don't think we yet have a technology or a process by which we can avoid 0 days, right, Tony? I mean, you're a CTO, you're a dev guy. I think we can all agree that, well, if they only did this, a 0 day is a 0 day because it's systematic. It's almost like a plane crashing, right? It's not just one thing. It's a series of issues that lead to a 0 day.
As long as there are humans doing the coding, we're going to continue to have 0 days. And people think when we have AI that's available to do coding for us, for a while, we're going to have the same issues because, quite frankly, it'll be humans programming the AI before it starts learning on its own. And inherently, we're going to have 0 days in code developed by AI as well until we get much further along, the evolution of AI. these problems are going to persist, and it's going to pop up in all the software. And James, you've heard me say it before. I will state for sure that the recent attack that we saw, everybody said, well, that's the biggest one we've ever seen. Well, I think it's important to note the biggest one we know about right now. So there could be others that are larger we simply don't know about.
Yeah, to me, Kaseya, I've been one of those people who's been, to me, Kaseya is not the big one. I've always said SolarWinds is the big one. We still don't know the full impact of SolarWinds 7-8 months later. Here's an example of maybe how they found the 0-day. When you're sitting in someone's environment and you're able to put write and put code into their CI/CD pipeline to get put out, and you just did it on Orion, and they go, we don't see anything anywhere else. Well, they don't need to do anything anywhere else. They can just watch, find the 0 days, look for those vulnerabilities, and start exploiting them at random times. I mean, the best way to take advantage of SolarWinds is to be someplace where everyone thinks that you're not there. And we're going to see a lot more of these come up, because we saw that with SolariGate on Microsoft. That was part of SolarWinds. That's how they found that 0-day. And now this one. And I think everyone who talks about Kaseya goes, well, this is a big one. It's a huge ransomware. They're like, no, it attacked MSPs. And it kind of helped eliminate some of the amateurs in the market, right? Because if you're an amateur MSP who didn't take security seriously, you weren't patching, you weren't doing the stuff that you needed to do, and you weren't able to sell backups to your customers, then you're probably out of business today. And not to say that I want someone to go out of business, but it eliminates some of the amateurs that go into the marketplace without any experience because they see it as a capital opportunity, but don't have the expertise.
I agree with you completely on that. It's a little frustrating, and I think that we're going to see other large ones maybe this year. Hopefully Biden and Putin will come to some agreement, and we could at least take one country out of it where they're starting to prosecute, our criminals engaged in this activity. The espionage piece is going to continue. I mean, that's not going to change at all. But if we could even get them to separate and start extraditing some of these people out of Russia, then we can focus more on nation state attacks and the Chinese.
Yes, indeed. And just for the sake of people who aren't aware of this, from a geopolitical perspective, this opinion is my own. Tony is not going to agree with this or not, because for some people this is a very sensitive topic. But I will say this: we have more in common with Russia than we do with China. And Putin is looking at what China's doing, and he understands that China could be an existential threat to Russia as well. And they're trying to bypass Russia with the Silk Road Initiative. And they're trying to take over former USSR strategic nations that are part of the Soviet kind of inner circle, especially Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and others. And those are all going to be, we have an opportunity here to get Putin on board with something, open up their economy slowly but surely, and start to form some sort of friendship, almost World War II, kind of like, hey, we're going to come from the West, you come from the East. That's how we'll get rid of the Nazis. Type of relationship with China, where we can come from the South, they can come from the North, and Russia and China share a border. For those whose geography may not be all that well, and there's an opportunity there. Not to say that I'm encouraging war or saying that we're going to end up in war, but you're able to do a lot more pressure on a nation when you get along with its neighbors rather than not.
This is true. Very true.
Let's move to our next story, folks, where REvil or REvil, whatever you want to call them. Thank you, everyone, for all the name recommendations you've given me over the years. Has mysteriously disappeared after the attack that you just talked about, the Kaseya ransomware attack. And it's leading to speculations that they may have been taken down, that maybe Putin went to those guys and sent, the FSB and said, hey, guys, let's go take these guys down because we want to be friends with President Biden in the U.S. But historically, though, REvil or REvil has kind of disappeared over time and then come back.
Yeah, this
right,
is a fascinating. Yeah, this is a fascinating story to me, James. And purely right now across the board, I think almost everyone is speculating on what has happened here. Are they simply offline, as you stated, because they've been offline before and they just took everything down? Maybe they're having outage issues, which is unlikely considering, how many different things related to REvil are down. My opinion is I think this may be some backdoor coordinated action between the U.S. government and the Russian government, to provide some sacrificial lambs, for this action that was taking place. Not that the lambs are really lambs in this instance, but right. I do think that potentially it could be Russia is actually working with us, and I'm sure we'll find out in future days here, what's happened. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they come back up. It'd be nice to see some coordinated action between Russia and the United States to bring these guys to justice.
It would be that. I kind of shared with you pre-show. I think what happened here is REvil is not only, it may be Russia based from an infrastructure perspective, but people part of that organizational group are all over Eastern Europe and part of countries where maybe those guys are now on the run. And so they took down everything in order to maybe disappear and try to find their way to Venezuela or Brazil or any country that doesn't extradite, Hong Kong maybe, then stay in their respective countries.
I think if they're on the run, it's a great time to come visit Disney World. Great time for them.
Or, go take your girlfriend on a trip to Greece or Spain, because those are also great locations right now. I hear Mykonos this time of year in Greece is just beautiful. So go give that a shot. But we'll see more on this as I'm monitoring this specific story, and I'll get you guys more information as it becomes available. We'll move to our final story of the day. Yesterday, Microsoft Patch Tuesday, 117 flaws, 90 days. And Tony, you said something very, very interesting, which is whose smart idea is it to have everyone issue patches on Patch Tuesday?
Yeah, I just don't get it. I don't think anybody who's issuing patches and setting up the schedule for these releases has ever worked in an IT and security environment that's, large enterprise that's responsible for updating systems, because it's just, it just becomes a complete mess, trying to patch more than likely your enterprise Microsoft environment, but now you add in vulnerabilities as well from VMware and SAP and many others that also rolled out vulnerabilities on Tuesday, or noted vulnerabilities with patches. Then it's problematic. This thing needs to be separated out. As James and I were talking earlier, it's like being on the road and getting home, and your honey-do list says, we need you to mow the grass, paint the house, change the oil in all the cars, and just a never-ending list that you're never going to get accomplished before it's on to the next Patch Tuesday a month later. So, and it's some pretty serious vulnerabilities as well.
Very significant vulnerabilities. Tony was kind enough to share this link, which is also in the show notes, folks. So this is the SANS breakdown of Patch Tuesday. And you can see the list here. I wish I could organize this in a way where you could see, I can just have critical on top and everything else below, but unfortunately, they've taken the Excel and made it a PDF and put it on their website. So we can't do that, but you see a bunch of different CVEs. Brian Krebs also put out a pretty detailed report, also looking at Adobe, that also released a bunch of patches as well. And Chrome and Firefox all have also patches on the web browsers. So if you're in IT and you're in patch management, you've got a very, very busy few weeks. And I hope you weren't planning on taking any PTO this month, because I don't know that, you're going to be able to do that. But significantly, Tony, here, right before we end, let me ask you this. From a patch management perspective, having all these patches is not just the quantity, right? It's the idea. A lot of people think that, I can patch my servers the same way I patch my phone or my computer, but that's not always the case, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, kind of help our audience understand why patching is so difficult?
Yeah, it's problematic when you think about it. A good example is financial services. Maybe they've got a web server that's vulnerable here that they need to patch. It's in their DMZ, and quite frankly, it's sometimes problematic just to switch activity over to another set of servers while you patch one. And you think about, for financial services, the reason I want to bring that one up is, some of these systems are processing billions of dollars of transactions, in an hour, some in seconds. So totally serious, some in seconds. So you think about those systems, you can't break them, you can't knock them down, because if you do, you're going to be out the door in an instant, with somebody else in charge of that environment, because it's problematic. And there's a lot of systems like that are extremely challenging to do the patches. And of course, the first thing you have to do when all this comes out is you got to test them first. So you can't just sit there and patch your system. Today, I've got a phone, and I got a backup phone. As James was talking about, a new iOS update comes out, bam, bam, and I've got that downloaded. If I crashed it, so what? I just backed it up before. I'll start it from scratch and reload it. You can't do that in an enterprise environment. So it can be very hazardous to the environment and to your career.
Yeah, it's patching is not as simple as people want to make it seem. It's very complex. It requires a lot of planning. It also, you've got to go to the people who own, if you've got, like you said, let's take your example. If I go to a financial services company and I know this part of the business owns this web server that needs to get patched, I got to coordinate with them to do the patch.
Yeah.
What are some times that we can do this? Oh, Saturday night between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Okay, so now we need to test this environment to make sure that when we do it between 3 to 5, that at 5 we can turn it back on, right? And we can get it done in that 2-hour window, because some patches can take 24 to 48 to 72 hours to really take place. And that stuff is significant. I think a lot of people, because it's so easy to patch on our phones and our computers, people almost translate that like, how hard is it? Just hit update on your server and that's it. And sometimes the patch hinders different operations within different applications that are on that server, and that patch could disable a critical function that exists, and now you've got to find a workaround.
Yeah, and it's a new world that we have to think about. I'm where I live today. I'm waiting for my account to open, and for me to get my Starlink dish, and I will be on Starlink. Think about trying to patch that environment when you're trying to patch a satellite. No easy task, and quite frankly, there are a number of systems like that as well that are problematic. OT systems for organizations that buy something that they think should run for 15 to 20 years and doesn't have a patch available, and yet a vulnerability is discovered. That's problematic. So you got to build a mitigation strategy for that. You think about some of the probes that these different government organizations have launched that are exploring space, ESA in Europe and NASA here in the United States and Japanese Space Agency and many others. Most of those systems can't be patched, and nevertheless they communicate with those systems, and there's back-end systems that need to be protected that communicate with them in older operating systems. So there's a lot of complexity to patching some systems that, Joe or Joan average user doesn't think about. Those are extreme cases, of course.
Nathan wants Starlink too, so get on the waiting list.
Me too, Nathan. Me too. I'm on the waiting list.
All right, Tony, you guys have some very exciting announcements today coming out from Attivo. What can you share with us?
Well, it actually should have gone live 23 minutes ago. We've launched our new KIM solution. So we are now expanded very firmly into a new category, identity detection and response, or IDR. So yes, I know no one wanted another acronym, but that's it. Identity detection and response. It's pretty cool. We're providing, likely the only solution out there today that really provides end-to-end analysis of identity and entitlement exposures and risk on endpoints and Active Directory and in the cloud. So on the Azure side and AWS as well. So it's pretty cool and very different what we're doing. If you look at some of these 0 days that we just talked about, definitively applicable to that. So since many of these are focused on vulnerabilities in Active Directory as well. So it's interesting. So, and you can find out more at attivonetworks.com or join James later this week in another show.
Yeah, so 11 a.m. on Friday, I'll have Caroline and Joseph on. We're going to be talking about closing the gap between endpoints and identity protection and how important that is for us to identify that, because at the end of the day, every single cybersecurity incident that goes through your network goes through Active Directory.
And it's ignored.
It's ignored.
Yeah, I don't get it. It's like everybody uses it. Mandiant reported the other day, or actually a couple months ago, that 90% of the attacks they see use Active Directory, as a mechanism for elevating privileges. And security teams don't talk about Active Directory very much. It's really surprising to me.
It's setting the controls within Active Directory and closing the gap so that identity becomes something that's hard to replicate, which today is very easy to do, right? Because legacy authentication allows you to bypass MFA. So we want to be looking at this from a perspective of how do we protect our Active Directory, and especially now where Active Directory is in the cloud. Azure Active Directory is cloud-based, meaning once someone gets in, they can literally get across any one of your apps, meaning they can get into your Azure environment or your AWS environment, especially if you're using a single sign-on, single identity perspective for a user. If I get a hold of your account admin in that, game over. We'll get to some comments here. Matt Lee says IDR. This is the awesome Daniel Sergile saying good morning to you, good sir. Tom says quite a mouthful. Let me help you sell that new from Nathan. I have no active reliance, no Active Directory reliance, only AADJ, and then PIM and PAM on-demand administration. Yes, but how many people actually know how to configure a PIM or a PAM? That's number one. And number two, the management of that is a full-time job to begin with, which is another big issue, which is why these it gets there and just-in-time provisioning. Agree again. All of that's available, but you got to have an E3, E5 Microsoft Enterprise license. And not everyone sees the benefit of going to an E3, E5 internet license. I know you do, Sir Giles, because you're just a smoking deputy CISO in your life. But, we love PIM and PAM. And again, Matt, you're one of the responsible people. I think that there's a group of people that watch and listen to our show that are responsible, that know how to take this stuff and carry it forward. But what Tony just brought up is why ransomware is so rampant, how they get across, and it's all done through Active Directory. It's just very, very simple. It's not only ransomware, but it's data breaches, it's data leaks, you name it. It's unbelievable. It's really crazy. Well, folks, we've gone way over. Tony, I love having you on here. I don't want the show to end, but I know you have other stuff to do. So folks, go check out attivonetworks.com. Check out their IDR solution. Join us on Friday for our webinar. You can sign up below and click on the link. Join me, Caroline, and Joseph. We'll be taking your questions. It's going to be very interactive. This isn't a PowerPoint slide kind of webinar. We will have a few slides. I'm not going to lie to you, but we're really going to be fielding questions. We're going to be talking to you guys, helping you understand how identity is critical and helping you address some of the critical questions you have. There's two very qualified people with Caroline and Joseph that you guys are going to absolutely love. Thank you, Christopher, for your comment. Good morning. Thank you for taking your time out of your day for this great stream. Thank you for joining us, folks. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Best show ever from the awesome David Vaughn. So thank you, David. Very much appreciate it. But this show would not be possible without all your great comments and participation, and without people like Tony coming on and sharing their wisdom with us, folks. So, Tony, thank you so much for taking time and being with us this morning.
Thank you very much, James, and thanks to everybody for their input and comments and for joining us today. Appreciate it. It's always fun doing the show with you.
Absolutely, folks. Tony will be with us again next month, so I'll have that date put out for you guys pretty soon when Tony will be with us again. And until then, thank you, everyone, so much for being part of the show today. I really do appreciate it. Go get your systems patched. You can reach out to Tony. Tony, you're on LinkedIn as Tony Cole. And what other ways can people get in touch with you?
It's William Tony Cole. So on LinkedIn, and I'm at No Hackin. So no G on it, No Hackin on Twitter.
Brilliant. Folks, that's it for us here. Have a great rest of your day. Most importantly, folks, stay cyber safe. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.